I'll get a room of 2,000 people and I'll say, raise your hand if you think we sell solutions. And you almost everyone will raise their hand. And they'll say, well, raise your hand if you think we sell problems. And almost no one will sell that, raise their hand for that. And the fact of the matter is that no one wants the solution until they have a problem to solve. And nobody wants to solve the problem until the problem is causing pain. So the very first thing you've got to do...
Fastlane Founders and Legacy with Jason Barnard. Each week, Jason sits down with successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, and executives and get them to share how they mastered the delicate balance between rapid growth and enduring success in the business world. How can we quickly build a profitable business that stands the test of time and becomes our legacy? A legacy we're proud of. Fastlane Founders and Legacy with Jason Barnard.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Fastlane Founders and Legacy. I'm Jason Barnard here with a quick hello, and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Dr. Guy Baker.
And thank you very much.
How lovely. I believe your middle name is Eugene.
Eugene, it's a family name.
Brilliant. Wonderful. We're going to be talking about market tune-up, which is all about building a business, the principles behind building a business, specifically in the financial industry. And I'm hoping it's going to help me in the services industry too.
Yeah, so I got the title from the standpoint of an automobile. When you tune up an automobile, I kind of thought if you had a marketing organization, there are probably some things you ought to do to tune it up to be more proficient, more efficient, more effective.
And so we're going to be talking about tuning up, making it more effective and efficient. Brilliant. Wonderful. Before we do that, I always look at brand SERPs, the search result for people's names, but I decided for you to look at ChatGPT. And I asked it to tell me more about Guy Eugene Baker. And it's got a lot of information about you, including a bachelor's, 3 masters, and a doctor's, which I assume is correct. It's not hallucinating, is it?
No, it's not hallucinating.
So all of that is true. And I asked you earlier on, do you have 12 great-grandchildren? You said yes. So it's got that right too. The only thing it's got completely wrong is the photos.
I'm sorry, the what?
The photos at the top. The
photos,
at the top are not you.
I have no idea where they came from.
So ChatGPT did an amazing job on you, used your Wikipedia page, used your company page, managed to figure out pretty much all of your life, but it couldn't figure out what you looked like. So that's one of the weaknesses of AI is it can get a lot right. It can sometimes get a lot wrong, which is why, you might have 14 great-grandchildren or 5 great-grandchildren, and ChatGPT might have been hallucinating. So I decided I would check. But with people's faces, it seems to struggle a great deal.
Well, that's why it's artificial.
Yep. And our work at Canicube is to control what ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Copilot, Perplexity, all of these machines say about us. What they say about you when you're not in the room, as Jeff Bezos almost said, is your personal brand. Your brand is what people are saying when you're not in the room. In our case, your personal brand is what Google and AI are saying about you when you're not in the room. So, onto the market tune-up.
Yes.
What kind of things can we improve? You're saying we're going to improve things to become more efficient, more effective. What are we looking at?
Well, I really am a strong advocate and adherent to Michael Gerber, when he talks about the E-myth. And I think if you take that same attitude towards a marketing organization, a consulting firm, a sales organization, or whatever, and you wear the various hats, there's all sorts of things that are going on in that organization that maybe if you were doing it just a little bit better, you might get better results. A really good friend of mine many years ago told me about the sailing team that his friend went on. And he said they were the best sailing team, He said, but when he got on and did the training, they just did things a little bit better than the other sailing teams that he was on. And that's why they got first place. So I think you can apply that same principle to running your business.
Right. So the tiny details that add up to make the team as a whole more performant. What are some examples of the tiny details in a marketing team?
Well, I'd say, one example would be just your financials, knowing what makes your company successful. if you look at all the factors that you have to deal with in terms of marketing, the flow of leads, the flow of opening interviews, the flow of gathering facts, how you put that all together. There's really only one thing, I believe, that's a measure of your long-term success. And that's how many cases that you have, in the final phase before you actually are able to charge them. Everything else leads up to that. So you just got to do each of those little steps a little bit better, but you've got to make sure that you keep track of all the cases that you've got, like, for instance, in insurance, in underwriting, in consulting, where you're actually doing the project and maybe you're phase billing them. I mean, it just depends on the business that you're in.
Yeah.
But whatever that business is, the bottom line is the bottom line. And unless you can keep track of all the projects that you've got that are contributing to that bottom line, you'll never know whether you're on track for your goals or not.
Right. I mean, we're in phase billing. So we do phase billing. So we've got people in kind of that some pot talking to us about whether or not they want to get on board with our services, let us look after their personal brand in search and AI. Is that a part that I need to focus on first, or the steps leading up to that part to fill up that pool with more people?
Well, I think it's both, right? So,
But if I have to start somewhere, do I start where the people are currently sitting in the pool?
well, if you know your statistics, you're going to do a much better job of running your business. So, how many initial interviews do you have to get somebody to say, yeah, I'd like to do it. I'd like you to do an evaluation. And then how many evaluations do you have to do before you find the next step, which is somebody that's going to let you do the evaluation? And then how many of those evaluations turn into billing opportunities and turn into ongoing clients? I would think in your business, I'm just off the top of my head, not knowing much about it, there's probably a huge correlation, if you will, between the number of people that you connect with and do one job with and those that come back and let you do more than one job.
Mhm. Yep,
And I would
absolutely.
think that's where your profitability is in the conversion of one job to multiple jobs.
Right. And I mean, an example there would be if we start working on somebody's personal brand for an entrepreneur, for example, or a CEO, and then potentially they say, oh, I'd like to also look at my company, my brand, and work on that.
Right.
So,
And then the question is, are there phases to their brand? Is there, you know, getting it onto the internet might be one job. Another one, getting into social media might be one job. Getting
mm,
them out to their existing client base. I've always found that when people slow down, the smartest thing they can do is go back to their best customers and just talk to them and say, how are you doing? Is there anything that I can help you with? And you generally, if they're happy with you, they're going to say, oh, gosh, Jason, I'm so glad you called. I've got this problem that I'm really coping with. Maybe you've got some insight.
right. Well, there's another thing. You just said problem. I've often come at this from um, the viewpoint that I have a solution to lots of different problems, and I tend to not be thinking so much about the person's problem, but more about my solution.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up because that's been one of my favorite
Mhm.
subjects through the years. Okay. In fact, I wrote a book called Why People Buy, and there's a large portion of it that's dedicated to that very topic. Okay. So
Right.
I've had the good pleasure and opportunity and blessing of speaking all over the world to
Yep.
financial advisors. Okay. And I'll get a room of 2,000 people and I'll say, raise your hand if you think we sell solutions. And you almost everyone will raise their hand. And they'll
Mm.
say, well, raise your hand if you think we sell problems. And almost no one will sell that, raise their hand for that. And the fact of the matter is that no one wants the solution until they have a problem to solve. And nobody wants to solve the problem until the problem is causing pain. So the very first thing you've got to do is help somebody identify the pain that the problem's causing and get them to internalize that to the place where they say, Jason, please fix this for me.
And how do you lead them down to that place? I mean, you need to identify what the pain is and then what the problem is. Is it better if I explain it to them, or they need to find it themselves?
Well, I think it's a process. I mean, obviously, if you've got a toothache, you know you've got a problem, and you're going to go to the dentist, and you don't care what it costs to fix it. Just get rid of that pain, right?
Yeah.
So there are those types of pains, but most pains are denial. Okay, they
Oh,
don't.
what do you mean by that?
Well, they don't know they have the problem.
Oh, okay. So we have that problem. We have the problem that our potential clients don't know they have a problem, which is
Right.
when they're not in the room, Google and AI are misrepresenting them, and they're potentially losing millions of dollars in deals, which is what happened to me and why I started this business. I lost a lot of money because Google was misrepresenting me. How do I get people to see that there's a problem and that there is pain there if they haven't already seen it?
So one of my favorite bromides is when in doubt, ask a question.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So what you need to do, and what your listeners, if you have any here for this, need to do, is they need to know what their services are so well that they have 2, 3, 5 key questions that they can ask to get the conversation going, and that those questions then are like pulling a thread. The more you pull the thread, the more the sweater unravels, right? And you
Mhm.
get down to the problem. And these don't have to be highly AI intellectual questions. They can just be a real simple question of, Jason, tell me about your business. And so you tell me about your business. And then I say, okay, Jason, and listening to you, it sounds to me like one of the biggest problems that you might be dealing with is getting people to recognize that they need your services. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then you're going to tell me what that's like. And then from what you tell me, and if you don't, then I'm going to encourage you to tell me, right?
Mhm.
Then as you tell me what that's like, then I'm going to hear things that fit my model of service, and
Yeah.
then we can start pulling on that string.
Okay. So, I mean, for me, then it would be if you're the CEO of the company and your personal brand is important to the company, you're the face of the company. People are searching your personal brand. What happens when they do that? What is Google? What is AI saying? And is it hurting your business?
Right. So if you're more holistic than that,
Mhm.
one of the things that you could talk to them about is, if you took a 6-month vacation today, what would happen to your company?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, this is a good question.
Yeah, you're good at this.
Yeah, I hope so.
A lot of
I've only
experience.
been doing it 60 years.
Ah, brilliant. Yep, yep. Yeah, I'm an upstart. Okay, yep. So that immediately leads me into the question: is the company relies too much on my personal brand?
Right. In which case, then where's the opportunity for you?
Building up the corporate brand and
Exactly.
winding down the personal brand.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Oh, jolly good. Oh, I like that. Okay. Um, so you said ask questions. And a lot of people have said to me in a sales call, you should always be asking open ended questions and you should speak very little. Is that true or should it be more balanced?
Well, I definitely think it has to be balanced. Another bromide that I've heard through the years that I think is true is, never ask a question you don't know the answer to, right?
Mm,
But when you're fact finding and you're helping somebody discover, come out of denial and discover, what their issues are, you have to have some back and forth on that. And you're not necessarily going to know the answer, but the more skilled you are and the more experienced you are, when you see the pattern starting to evolve, you know where that pattern is going to go.
And when you talk about patterns, it's the more you talk to the prospects who are the right people, the right kind of clients, the more you're going to see patterns. And after a while, it just becomes second nature.
Well, yeah, let's take this conversation and talk about patterns, okay? When you asked me a couple of minutes ago about your brand, as an executive, okay, I immediately knew from that that there was a pattern of probability, high probability, that you're a sole practitioner and you don't have people backing you up if you took a 6-month vacation, which then allowed me to ask the question, what happens to your company if you take a 6-month vacation, voluntarily or involuntarily?
Yep, very good point. Yeah, and I mean, I do have a team, and they do the work, and theoretically, I could stop for 6 months. But what would happen to Caddycube right now is that um, the inflow of potential new clients into the pool who are close to conversion would probably slow down over that 6-month period because I'm not there anymore.
Right. But one of the patterns that emerges out of what you just said now is whether or not there's anybody on that team that you trust enough to take your chair.
Yeah. Okay. And if there isn't, I need to start thinking about how that's going to happen over the coming months or
Exactly.
years.
Right. And, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but my guess is that you're probably a lot closer to stepping away from your chair than you are getting into it. So, um, you probably want to think about some type of a transition strategy sooner than later. So those,
Yeah.
so those are all, those are all consulting project subjects, topics that you can talk about that have patterns that can then lead to an engagement.
Right. Okay. And in terms of objections, now you've started talking to me. We've been talking in a sales call about my problems, and you have the solution to my problem, and you can ease the pain. When I start to push back with objections, for example, the investment that's necessary for me.
Right. So, what is it? You have to understand objections. Most salespeople are scared to death of objections
Yeah.
because they realize that that's maybe the beginning of the end of the conversation. Okay. But that's really not true. It can be, obviously. It depends on how well you've prospected the person, how well you've profiled them to understand whether or not your services make sense, which is that. So there's a juxtaposition that takes place in every interview. Okay.
Mm.
So, so every interview initial interview that I hold, I always start with the same question or statement. And that is, let me tell you why I stopped by, or let me tell you why I wanted to see you. And then I'll usually follow that up by saying, one of the things, Jason, that we've found with almost everybody in your situation is they're so busy being successful and focusing on the things that they have to do to keep revenue coming in the door that they really don't have time to pay attention to the details that are surrounding them that would make them more successful and get them to a higher plane and free up some of their time. Have you found that to be true?
Right. Yeah. My answer is, of course, yes.
Yeah, sure. And everybody's answer is going to be yes. So what we do is we help people evaluate what their objectives are, their goals are, what they're doing specifically to attain those goals, and look for opportunities then that can help you delegate more effectively, be more efficient with your clients, and reach your goals and objectives in at a higher level than you've ever done it before. Now, I know that could sound like BS to you, and I appreciate that. But, having done this as many years as I've done it, and my track record, I think you can believe that there's probably something here we can help you with.
Yeah. And do you find that for CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, one common pain point is not enough time? And if you can offer a service that will free up time by taking weight off their shoulders and worry off their mind, that's always going to be a great service for them.
Well, that's a pattern of successful people, because, if you ask that question to somebody, who is ever going to say, oh, no, I'm not busy? They're never going to say that, right? So anyway, going back to your question about objections, right? So the objections are usually a request for more information.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So when somebody submits an objection, the proper response to that, in my mind, can be either, well, that's an interesting question, Jason. Tell me why you asked that. Or you can say to you, Jason, you can say, well, that's very interesting, but I'm not sure I really understood what you meant. Could you rephrase that for me? Reframe that for me. So what happens in both of those cases is that the person then has to rethink what they said and say it in a different way. And a lot of times when they hear the question in their brain, they realize it's baloney, and they become more honest. So with an objection, what you really want to do is you want to engage them in a conversation about that objection and what that objection means, rather than just take it at face value. You know, I'm too busy and I don't have enough money. Okay, well,
Yeah.
when somebody says I'm too busy, the rule is whoever says the objection first wins. Okay. So
Mhm.
if I've already said you're too busy being successful, okay, and now you
Mhm.
say I'm too busy, what I can just come back and say to you, well, Jason, you just proved my point.
Mm.
You are so busy that there are things that you need to be thinking about that could possibly help you be more effective and bring more money to your bottom line so that you would have money to be able to do the things that would grow your business. So see, I just turned that whole thing back around on
Mhm.
you, where the services that we're talking about are going to solve the very problem you're objecting to.
Right. And if I then say, well, the investment is too much for me and I don't value my time that much,
Okay, so you know, whenever you're in doubt, you do what?
ask a question.
Ask a question. So I heard what you said, that the investment's too much, but we haven't really talked about what the investment is. So are you talking about the investment of your time to figure out how to solve this? Or are you talking about the fee that you might pay me in order to be able to help you come to the best conclusions on how to solve this? What, so when the investment's too much, what do you mean exactly?
Right. Okay. And then that forces them to say, well, in fact, it's the money, at which point you can come back and presumably say, well, if I can free up time for you, you can actually spend that time usefully generating more income or revenue for your company.
Right. And, this is a really good time, I think, in the conversation with the client to find out whether or not you've really got a viable client. Because, see, in this opening interview, there's two decisions that have to be made. All right. The first
Mhm.
decision is whether or not you want to work with me. Right.
Yeah.
The second decision is I got to decide whether I want to work with you.
Mm. Right. Yep. Which is something I think we often forget is that both people need to want to work together, and
Right.
if that doesn't happen, it's never gonna be a happy relationship and a profitable relationship for both parties.
Right. So I can ask you a question then is, when you're procrastinating me,
Mm.
and putting this off because you don't want to spend the money right now, you know, is it, we've talked about what I think we can do for you and how we can
Mm.
help you. Is there any time in the future, if you had enough money, that you could see using services like ours?
Okay. Yep. And now I remember that our head of sales, Leanne, um, pretty much explained that to me the other day, and I'd kind of forgotten it. And you just nailed it back into my head.
Yeah. Well, and another way to frame that is, if we're able to do the things that I suggested that we can do and help you get to your bottom line and enhance it,
Hmm.
is there any reason that you can think of that you wouldn't want to do business with us,
Yeah.
with me? Because see that puts it right square on the line. And if they say, well, the timing's not right, or whatever answer they come up
Mm.
with that's negative, now you're back into that position of who, do we really want to do business with this person, and vice versa. If they really like the conversation and where this is going, and they have at least come to a general understanding that they're in denial and that they need to be doing something here, then they're going to say, no, I can't think of anything, and say, okay, well then where would you like to start? Where would be the best place for you to start? Now,
Mm.
notice in all of my questions, I hope generally, I'm throwing the ball back to you.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm not answering the questions. I'm throwing the ball back to you, because if you have the power and you have the self-determination, this is going to be a good relationship. If I'm having to pull you and pull you and pull you, it's not going to be a good relationship. So I have to give you the power. In my book, Why People Buy, one of the things that I say is that people do what they want to do when they want to do it. Okay. In other words, I can't make anybody do something they don't want to do. So my job is to help them figure out what they want to do and then show them how to do it.
Absolutely. In that case, that's a great place to end it. That was a brilliant conversation. Thank you, Guy.
Well,
that was perfect. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. That was super interesting. And you get the outro song. A quick goodbye to end the show. Thank you, Guy.
My pleasure. It was great to be with you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, man.
Your corporate and personal brands are what Google and AI say they are. We can give you back control. CaliCube.